Welcome to A Course in Miracles, where you'll discover health and well-being through inner peace. Your host is Eloisa Ramos, EFT master and author of Beyond Self-Esteem, Discovering Your Boundless Self-Worth. Using EFT, the Ramos clearing technique, and the principles of A Course in Miracles, you'll learn how to open your mind to healing and to all that is inherently yours: deep fulfillment, vitality, joy, and inner peace.
Welcome to today's A Course in Miracles program. My name is Eloisa Ramos. Today we will be exploring the ideas of survival, stress, and health with the guidance of lessons 135 through 158 of A Course in Miracles, and we are going to be primarily focusing on two lessons. 135, which says, "If I defend myself, I am attacked," and 136, which says, "Sickness is a defense against the truth." And we want to focus on these because we really want to understand the connection between defenses and sickness. So today we're going to ask, can defenses, like survival mode, which is a plan to save our body from pain and death, but which also demands and therefore puts stress on the body's energy resources, which are needed for regeneration and growth, be such a good defense? Excuse me. And what is the truth that sickness is defending against? We tend to believe that if I defend myself, I won't be attacked, because defense is supposed to make us strong and help us. But in Lesson 135, A Course in Miracles points out the opposite. It says that if I defend myself, I am attacked. And it says this because it continues, quote, "A sense of threat is an acknowledgement of an inherent weakness, a belief that there is danger, which has power to call on you to make appropriate defense." And so what it's saying is that a defense which is aimed to protect us is implying that we are weak because we would not need protection otherwise. A Course in Miracles calls this a, quote, insane belief, unquote, on which the world is based on, because threat and attack are only possible when there's bodies, egos that are separate. Wholeness cannot attack itself. You need parts to oppose one another. So let's explore survival a little bit. I was hiking the other day, and I tuned into the feeling of tightness in my legs as I was walking up a hill. And I was pushing, I was working against gravity, and I was feeling all this effort expended to overcome the opposition of gravity. It occurred to me that in this world of survival, strength and fitness is perceived as that which can carry us safely through life, much like my legs were carrying me up the hill against gravity. But survival is very much like moving upstream, having to oppose the threats that come our way. Survival, it occurred to me, as a plan of defense, will have to employ this push through life against the opposition and the threat that we perceive is present to our life. When we defend ourselves to survive, we are believing in something. We're believing that it's possible that something can not only oppose life, but and threaten it, but actually annihilate it. The employment of our defenses for survival make death very real and terrifying for us. For who would defend against something unreal and weak? Not only are we believing death is real, we have made it more powerful and greater than life in our mind, since it can threaten life itself and annihilate it. Here, the God of life is no longer in power, for death has conquered it. Survival is our plan of defense against that which is more powerful than God. How can this not be stressful? Perhaps we dare believe we can overcome death. Yes, we can take great pride and relief when we beat the odds and survive attack and sickness for a few more years. For a brief period, we can feel invincible because we have cheated death. We can believe we are the strongest and the fittest and worthy of passing on our genes in the hope that, one day in our evolutionary future, our bodies will be so strong that death, which we have established as more powerful than the very life that sustains our body, will triumph? That's clearly nonsense. If death is more powerful than life, then our body, which is sustained by that life, can never be more powerful than death. So yes, survival is going to be very stressful. It moves contrary to the truth of life, which is that nothing can oppose it, that death is not real. And so our survival defenses hide the truth. We are not body egos. We are spirit, mind, eternal, and one with all creation and the creator of life. But this defense is not easy to let go. It's called an instinct for a reason. We have practiced it daily and our ancestors for millions of years. Yet it is still but a belief. The difficulty of letting go of the survival defense is that it's tied to our body identification. And so as long as I believe I'm a body, I will be very much dependent on my physical senses to warn me of impending attack, on my body's physical strength to keep me alive. And why is this? Because I have defined life as the life of the body, and that's what I'm trying to protect. We believe that without a body, we have no life. So, to say, as A Course in Miracles says, you need to put down your defenses to ensure safety. It's like saying you need to endanger your survival to be safe, which doesn't make any sense from a body identification. It's like saying, okay, I give up, threat. You can just come and get me. Because we are so sure in our mind that we are separate bodies and something is out there just ready to attack as soon as our defensive guard is down, it makes these lessons really hard to accept. And of course, we can never find out the truth for ourselves until we let down our defenses and see that there was no real threat in truth. But we're not going to be willing to do that because we're afraid that having no defense invites attack and makes us weak. So the holding on to the defense is supporting the idea that I'm surrounded by danger and therefore I need to survive. And it's keeping the idea of survival in place. It's a loop that feeds itself. Defenses confirm the world is dangerous. Otherwise, why would I employ them? And the belief that the world is dangerous tells me I need to survive. I assume the world is dangerous because I see everyone trying to survive. So I must need to survive. But in order to survive, since only the strongest survive, I'm going to need defenses because I can't survive unless I have good defenses. So I'm back in the loop. If I have defenses, I'm reinforcing the idea that the world is dangerous and that I need to survive. And if I need to survive, I need defenses. And if I need defenses, the world is dangerous and I need to survive. And it just goes on and on and on, feeding on itself. When our survival instinct kicks in to defend our body, we get stuck in this loop since we have already identified ourselves with our body and therefore judged ourselves separate, vulnerable to attack, and therefore weak. We would not have reacted to the threat unless this was so, because true strength is invulnerable and does not need defense. You can think of it in terms of the kingdoms of the old times. Would a city with no vulnerabilities at all to attack need defense? Would they need the moats, and would they need all those walls and all those guards? Who would attack it unless they saw weakness? The king is going to attack his neighbor only when he can exploit a weakness and have a chance of victory. Otherwise, there would be no point. Lesson 135 continues. Defend the body, and you have attacked your mind. For you have seen in it the faults, the weaknesses, the limits, and the lacks from which you think the body must be saved. You will not see the mind as separate from bodily conditions. You will not be able to see the mind as separate from the bodily conditions as long as we take on the identity of being a body. The lesson continues, quote, and you will impose upon the body all the pain that comes from the conception of the mind as limited and fragile, and apart from other minds and separate from its source. These are the thoughts that need healing, and the body will respond with health when they have been corrected and replaced with truth. So it is very important in the health of our body to disidentify from that body identity, because as long as we're identifying our mind with that body identity, we cannot access the power that is inherent in our mind, since it cannot be separate from its source. When we are in survival mode, there's no way for us not to be identified with a body ego. The mind, which is not physical and therefore not subject to the limitations of the physical body, nor the conceptual bounded ego, will feel attacked because of this identification. It will see itself as vulnerable to all that is a threat to the body ego, believing that the mind can suffer pain and death. In truth, the mind is inherently powerful and cannot suffer pain and cannot die because it's not separate from its source. It is therefore not vulnerable to anything. But once it identifies itself with body or ego, it no longer remembers the truth about itself. It sees itself as a limited, vulnerable body ego and lacking in power. So I'm going to illustrate with an example of stress and survival some of what we've talked about. I was making breakfast yesterday and feeling stressed. I felt a little bit of anxiety because I had a rush. I was feeling rushed since I only had one day left to prepare for this, and I didn't feel like I had enough done to feel confident that it would get done. I believed, and it felt like I was alone carrying this project and would be responsible for the results. And so I was afraid that the time left was not enough. I felt limited by my physical capacity. I thought, I can only do so much in one day. And in addition, the thought that I would not have something to present, or that I would present something that was considered not good enough, disturbed me pretty deeply. So I was feeling pressured because I was taking this precious time that I need to spend on this show, and I was taking that time to work on a breakfast. So I muscle tested to see if my body was in survival mode. It wasn't, so I wondered, well, what could be feeling threatened if it's not my body? Well, I discovered it was my reputation. I was believing that my reputation needed protection or defense in the world because it felt like I would be dead to the world without it. I got the impression that somehow I would cease to exist in the world, that I would be a quote-unquote nobody. So here I was identifying with my ego and feeling like I needed to defend it in terms of defending my reputation. Why? Well, the defense told me that the threat to my reputation was real, and therefore my reputation had to be protected. If I realized that something was not real, there would be no point in protecting it. This defense kept me from seeing the truth, which I finally did because I did some clearing on these beliefs, and I disidentified myself with my reputation, which is something that can be done with the Ramos clearing technique. And so I saw that that I wasn't my reputation, and that in fact my reputation was just made up. It's not real. All right. And so there was no threat. What was interesting to me was that the survival fear came from believing that my reputation could die, because not having a reputation was like not existing. And so the truth here, the truth that these defenses were hiding, was that yes, reputation and ego are not real, and when I identify myself with them, I'm going to feel like I don't exist unless I can somehow be special or make a name for myself or build a reputation. And so it will feel that if these things fail me or if I damage them or hurt them, it will actually feel like I'm dying, and that I could, or if I let go of my ego, that I'm going to be nothing in the sense of not existing, of ceasing to exist. So let's look at lesson 136. Sickness is a decision. It's a choice you make, a plan you lay, when for an instant truth arises in your own deluded mind and all your world appears to totter and prepare to fall. Now are you sick, that truth may go away and threaten your establishment no more. You suffer pain because the body does, and in this pain are you made one with it. Thus is your quote-unquote true identity preserved, and the strange, haunting thought that you might be something beyond this little pile of dust, silenced and stilled. For see, this dust can make you suffer, twist your limbs and stop your heart, commanding you to die and cease to be. Thus is the body stronger than the truth which asks you live, but cannot overcome your choice to die. Now, this is a very difficult lesson to accept, okay, especially if you are sick. It's implying a lot of things that our mind will have a hard time, our ego mind will have a hard time accepting. The last thing we want to hear if we are sick is someone telling us, oh, you're not a victim of attack. You're doing it all to yourself. It's a decision to be sick. That would feel like they're blaming the victim, and we would judge that callous and hurtful. So let me share my experience to see if I can help you release some of this resistance. About 4 years ago, I ended up sick with extreme abdominal pain. I had diarrhea and I had vomiting. And it felt like I had food poisoning. And the pain reminded me of the only time I've ever been in the hospital, which was when I gave birth to my 4 children. I could not keep food down, and my legs would shake uncontrollably. So I was in bed like this for 2 days. I tried the tapping and only got slight relief. So on the morning of the 3rd day, I was ready to tell my husband I needed to go to the emergency hospital. And then I remembered this lesson, and I thought, I'm doing this to myself. Now, I didn't say it with blame. I said it because I was trying to really understand the truth in that and accept responsibility. Well, this turned out to be the turning point to my healing. I didn't have to go to the hospital. I let go of feeling victimized. When you see yourself as a victim, you will have to believe you are weak and vulnerable to attack. And I have to add here that when we see others as victims, or when we make it a point to overprotect or protect, for example, our children, unfortunately, we are also implying that they are weak and vulnerable to attack. And I have to say this because I have 2 kids that had asthma when they were young. Okay, and this was not something I was aware of then, but, and I have to say that in the Mexican culture, the parents tend to be very protective of their children. And we don't see that as a negative thing. We see that as a positive thing because that's what nurturing is to many of us. It means protecting, okay? And they're not the same thing. Protecting is a defense. And once you are defending, you're perceiving vulnerability and weakness. And often the kids will begin to see themselves that way because they will pick up on that. So, lesson 136 says, no one can heal unless he understands what purpose sickness seems to serve. Being causeless and without a meaningful intent of any kind, it cannot be at all. When this is seen, healing is automatic. So, let's go back to my example of when I was sick. What was the truth I was defending against with that illness? Well, what had happened the day before I got sick was that my sister, who visits from Mexico during the summer, had invited me over and got me to agree to come by in the evening for something to eat. My other sister had made a strawberry milkshake, which I drank. The problem was that I went over without really wanting to. I obligated to go, and I felt manipulated by my sister. Since she would invite me often and would always say, well, come over and eat. And I felt like I just couldn't say no. It wasn't that I didn't want to spend time with her. It was that I was feeling like I had barely enough time to attend to my other obligations. So the question, of course, is, what is the truth? Was I being manipulated and victimized by my sister? Well, no, of course not. There's nothing wrong with her wanting to spend time with me and, having food there to share. However, that's not what my feelings were telling me. Okay? They were telling me that I had no choice. Okay? And the truth was, I was not a victim, nor was I being manipulated. I was choosing. Because I was still choosing, even though I was feeling forced, because I was doing it out of obligation, and I wasn't really wanting to do it, and so this brought up resentment, and I blamed my sister, and I did that. Okay, because I was unwilling to see the truth, that I was not being manipulated or controlled by her, and that I had the complete freedom to say no. But instead of coming to that awareness in that moment, when that conflict showed up for me, I didn't even tap on that because I think it was it wasn't completely hidden because I was able to go back and tune into it. But in the moment, I opted for sickness. It was not something that I said, oh, I better tap on this, because, I've got all this resentment. And so by opting for sickness, I could hold on to the grievance against my sister and keep my identity of a victim. So, in fact, the sickness was reinforcing the very same idea that I had about myself in that situation. So rather than change the perception of what I believed I was, I opted for sickness to hold on to it. Here's another example. One of my clients called me because she had intense body and joint pains whenever she moved her body. She said, quote, "I can't count on anything," unquote, meaning that at age 85, her body was giving out. So in tapping, we found she was very identified with her body and felt deeply devalued because she had lost the pride in her independence, which was, of course, derived from doing things and being able to depend on her body to get her around. There were two events that we tapped on that had relevance to her physical pain, and one of them was that week her daughters had not called her like they usually do, and she was complaining that she could not count on them to do things for her, since she could no longer depend on her body now because they weren't returning her calls. They weren't calling her. And she felt upset because she no longer had control of her daughters to get them to do what she wanted done. Okay, the other event was that she was also holding on to some grievance because she felt that her friend had disappointed her. They lived in a retirement community, and the community had set up a art show just for her artwork to be displayed to everybody in that community. And because her friend had not shown up, and because she had been afraid that here was this special event aimed to display her, her work, which she was identified with, and she was afraid that nobody would show up. So she was counting on her friends to be there and avoid the possible embarrassment. And so she was upset with her friend because her friend had not shown up. And, of course, in tapping through that, she admitted that her friend had memory problems. But that was not something that she remembered when she had basically told her friend that she was very disappointed in her because she didn't go. And she felt that she was very justified in speaking her truth. And she was calling her feelings, her judgments here, as speaking her truth. And, of course, we work with that because that's true for her, okay? That's how she feels, but that's not truth. Those are subjective feelings based on her interpretation and on her assumption that her friend intentionally ignored her, which wasn't the case because, her friend has dementia, basically. So anyway, the third thing that she was doing during this time that she was experiencing all this pain was that she kept praying over and over, and she kept saying, "I surrender to what is." Now, the problem with the statement, "I surrender to what is that she was interpreting, obviously, what is reality as her physical pain. And therefore, she was making her pain real. And in surrendering to the pain, She was believing that she had to give up her independence and her mobility, because somehow that was her will, and she had to give that up so that God's will could be done. And so she was trying to surrender to God's will, but in her mind, God was willing her pain and suffering. And we worked on that too, because as the Course in Miracles has taught in some of the other lessons, God's will is only for our happiness. So what was her sickness allowing her to defend? Well, the belief that she's a victim to the undependability of others. It allowed her to hold on to her grievances and kept her from accepting the power of her mind to manifest what she wanted to see. She held on to the belief that God was undependable, and so that she was justified in depending on her own strength, that she did not need God, and that her independence was more valuable. And now that she saw that what she had deemed so valuable and depended on was failing her, she turned to God. And she was willing to surrender her independence and wanting to accept her pain and suffering, believing that this was somehow what God wanted for her. So, in her sickness, she would hold on to belief that pain and sickness comes from God and not from her unhealed mind. Lesson 35 says, enslavement of the body to the plans the unhealed mind sets up to save itself must make the body sick. It, meaning the body, is not free to be the means of helping in a plan which far exceeds its own protection and which needs its service for a little while. In this capacity is health assured. And so what it's saying here is that the body is sick when the unhealed mind is giving it instructions, because, as we have said before, mind is causal. When we identify as being a body, we are believing that the mind is weak and fragile, just like the body. A mind that believes that about itself needs healing, because those thoughts need healing. When the mind recognizes that it is not a body and that is not separate from others and that it is a part of a greater whole, the body will then be instructed from a healed mind, and defenses will not be necessary because the truth will be recognized. So what I want to leave you is the choice that I see. Either I want my mind to be in the service of my body and to make it strong, attractive, and give it specialness to succeed and survive in the world, or I want my body to be in the service of my mind and my mind to be in the service of spirit. If I choose to have my mind serve my body, I will be following direction from my ego thought system, putting my ego in the throne of God, and making myself vulnerable and weak and subject to death. And so the Course is helping us to learn that when we perceive ourselves, whether we perceive ourselves as a body or whether we perceive ourselves as part of the Spirit, which generates and is the source of life, that's going to be reflected in our experience, and our body is going to respond also to that. And so we can believe anything we want about ourselves, about our identity. And this is where our true power is, because we can now begin to make the connection between the belief and the effect, what we manifest. And when we realize that it is the mind, the beliefs, our thinking, that are responsible for what we are experiencing and feeling, then we can accept that responsibility and change our mind. And we can let go of our victim identity, and we can let go of needing defenses, because we will have recognized that that spirit mind cannot be threatened. It is not subject to death. And I think that all the wisdom, all the that comes from a lot of the religious traditions, all have that core belief that that we are children of Source, and that we are not separate from that, and so therefore we are free. There's nothing to fear. So thank you for joining me today. I hope that you will join me again next time, and we'll take a look at the next 14 lessons and see what we can learn about ourselves. So blessings to everyone, and goodbye.
For more information about EFT, muscle testing, working with Eloisa, and to download a free version of the Ramos Clearing Technique, visit www.healingwitheft.com.